The Great Deal. The sun hung low over the rolling green hills of Turnberry, Scotland, casting a golden glow across the manicured fairways of President Donald Trump's luxury golf resort. It was July 27, 2025, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Reporters from across the globe crowded the resort's grand pavilion, their cameras flashing like fireflies in the twilight. Microphones bristled along the edge of a makeshift stage, where a large American flag stood beside the blue and gold banner of the European Union. The world was watching, and President Trump, never one to shy away from a spotlight, was ready to deliver. Inside the resort's opulent conference room, Trump paced slowly, his red tie pristine against a tailored navy suit. His hair, as always, was a defiant swoop, catching the light from the chandeliers above. Across from him sat Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, her expression calm but resolute. The negotiations had been grueling, stretching late into the previous night. Coffee cups littered the mahogany table, and aides on both sides exchanged weary glances. But now, as the clock ticked toward the announcement, a quiet confidence settled over the room. They had done it. They had struck a deal. Trump stopped pacing and turned to von der Leyen, his eyes gleaming. Ursula, this is gonna be huge. The biggest deal ever made. People are gonna talk about this for centuries. Von der Leyen, her lips curling into a diplomatic smile, nodded. It's a strong agreement, Mr. President. It will bring stability and opportunity to both our economies. Trump clapped his hands together, the sound echoing in the room. Stability. Opportunity. It's more than that. It's a masterpiece. Zero tariffs for American goods, 15% on yours, $750 billion in energy purchases, $600 billion in investments, and don't forget the military equipment. The EU's gonna love our tanks, our jets. Top notch, the best in the world. Von der Leyen's smile tightened slightly. She had fought hard to keep the tariff rate at 15%, a compromise from Trump's earlier threats of 30% or even 50%. The deal wasn't perfect, European carmakers and pharmaceutical companies would feel the sting, but it averted a trade war that could have crippled transatlantic relations. For Trump, it was a triumph, a capstone to weeks of high-stakes negotiations that had kept global markets on edge. Let's go out there and tell the world, Trump said, straightening his jacket. They're gonna eat this up. The story of this historic trade agreement began months earlier, in the spring of 2025, when Trump returned to the White House with a renewed mandate and a promise to make trade fair again. His first term had been marked by tariff battles with China, Canada, and Mexico, but the European Union, America's largest trading partner, had always been a thorn in his side. The U.S. trade deficit with the EU had ballooned to $235.6 billion in 2024, a figure Trump cited at every opportunity. They're taking advantage of us, he'd say at rallies, his voice booming. Their tariffs, their barriers, their VAT taxes, it's a disgrace. We're gonna fix it. In April, Trump announced a sweeping 10% tariff on nearly all U.S. trading partners, with higher rates for specific countries. The EU faced a 20% levy, set to take effect on April 9. The move sent shockwaves through global markets. European leaders scrambled, offering a zero-for-zero tariff deal on industrial goods, but Trump dismissed it. Not good enough, he said in a Truth Social post. We need reciprocity, not charity. By May, tensions escalated. Trump upped the ante, threatening a 50% tariff on EU goods starting June 1, accusing the bloc of taking advantage of the United States with ridiculous corporate penalties and unfair lawsuits. European Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer held frantic calls, but progress was slow. The EU, wary of Trump's unpredictable style, prepared $108 billion in retaliatory tariffs, targeting American poultry, alcohol, and cars. The specter of a transatlantic trade war loomed. Then, on May 25, a breakthrough. During a call with von der Leyen, Trump agreed to delay the 50% tariff until July 9, giving negotiators a narrow window to strike a deal. "I had a very nice call with Ursula," Trump told reporters in New Jersey. "She wants to get serious. We'll see what they bring to the table." What followed was a whirlwind of diplomacy. Meetings in Brussels, Washington, and Davos tested the patience of both sides. The EU pushed for lower tariffs, emphasizing the $1.96 trillion in annual trade that bound the two economies. Trump, flanked by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, demanded concessions, open markets, massive energy purchases, and investment in American industries. "I'm not here to play games," he told von der Leyen during a tense session in June. "You want access to our market? You pay for it." As the July 9 deadline approached, Trump extended it again, to August 1, but not without a warning. On July 12, he posted on Truth Social, "The EU has been very difficult. If they don't come through, 30% tariffs start August 1. No exceptions." The threat galvanized European leaders. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni urged von der Leyen to secure a deal, even if it meant swallowing a higher tariff than they'd hoped. In Turnberry, the final negotiations unfolded against a backdrop of Scottish mist and rolling waves. Trump, ever the showman, had chosen his golf resort as the stage for the talks, a move that raised eyebrows in Brussels but set the tone for his approach: bold, unapologetic, and on his terms. Von der Leyen arrived with a small entourage, her briefing books thick with data on trade flows and economic projections. Trump, by contrast, relied on instinct, pacing the room and peppering aides with questions. "What's the deal with their cars?" he asked Lutnick at one point. "Why are we letting Audis and BMWs flood our market while they slap taxes on our Fords?" Lutnick, a sharp-eyed financier with a knack for numbers, laid out the stakes. "Mr. President, the EU's car tariffs are 10%, ours are 2.5%. They export $60 billion in vehicles to us annually. A 15% tariff levels the playing field and brings in billions." Trump nodded, pointing at von der Leyen. "You hear that, Ursula? Billions. That's what we're talking about. Real money." Von der Leyen, unflappable, countered with a proposal: zero tariffs on strategic goods like aircraft parts, chemicals, and generic drugs, plus a commitment to buy $250 billion in U.S. energy annually for 3 years. "This reduces our reliance on Russian gas," she said, appealing to Trump's geopolitical instincts. "And it strengthens our alliance." Trump leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Energy's good. I like that. But I want more. I want your markets wide open to American goods. Zero tariffs. And I want investment, big investment, in our economy." The talk stretched into the early hours of July 27. Aides shuttled between rooms, drafting clauses and crunching numbers. The EU balked at Trump's demand for zero tariffs across the board, citing the impact on their farmers and manufacturers. Trump, in turn, refused to budge below 15% on EU imports, insisting it was fair and reciprocal. At one point, von der Leyen suggested a 10% tariff, mirroring a deal Trump had struck with the UK. Trump shook his head. "The UK's different. You're the big fish. You want this deal, you meet my terms." By dawn, a framework emerged. The EU would open its markets to American goods at zero tariffs, a major win for U.S. exporters. In return, the U.S. would impose a 15% tariff on most EU goods, down from the threatened 30%. The EU committed to purchasing $750 billion in U.S. energy, liquefied natural gas, oil, and nuclear fuels, over 3 years, and investing $600 billion in American industries, from automotive to pharmaceuticals. Defense ties would be strengthened through hundreds of billions in purchases of U.S. military equipment, though Trump remained vague on the exact figure. As the sun rose, Trump and von der Leyen shook hands, their smiles masking the exhaustion of a hard-fought battle. "This is a deal for the history books," Trump said, clapping von der Leyen on the shoulder. "You're tough, Ursula, but I'm tougher." The announcement came at 4 p.m. local time, with the Atlantic Ocean shimmering in the background. Trump strode to the podium, his gait confident, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached a deal with the European Union, the biggest deal ever made." The crowd erupted in applause, though some European reporters exchanged skeptical glances. The EU will open its markets to American goods at zero tariffs. Zero. That means our farmers, our manufacturers, our carmakers, they're gonna thrive. In return, we're putting a 15% tariff on their goods. Fair, reciprocal, and strong. He paused, letting the words sink in. And that's not all. The EU is buying $750 billion in American energy. That's jobs for our oil workers, our gas workers, our nuclear industry. They're investing $600 billion in our economy, factories, plants, you name it. And they're buying our military equipment. Tanks, jets, the best in the world. This is a win for America, a win for Europe, and a win for the world. Von der Leyen stepped forward, her tone measured but optimistic. This agreement brings stability and predictability to our transatlantic partnership. The 15% tariff is a challenge for some of our industries, but it preserves access to the American market. We've agreed to zero tariffs on strategic goods, aircraft, chemicals, generics, and we will work to expand this list. The energy purchases will bolster our security, and the investments will deepen our economic ties. The press conference was a study in contrasts, Trump's bombast, von der Leyen's restraint. Questions flew from the crowd. A reporter from The Guardian asked about the impact on European carmakers, who faced a tariff hike from 2.5% to 15%. Von der Leyen acknowledged the difficulty but insisted, it could have been worse. Another journalist pressed Trump on pharmaceuticals, noting his earlier threat of 200% tariffs. Trump waved it off. "We're working on that. Pharma's special. We'll figure it out." Behind the scenes, the deal was far from final. The framework was a political agreement, not a binding treaty. Details, hundreds of pages of them, would need to be negotiated in the coming months. Some EU member states, particularly Germany and Ireland, grumbled about the tariff rate. The German auto trade group VDA estimated billions in added costs, while Ireland's Prime Minister warned of challenges for pharmaceutical exports. On the US side, agricultural groups cheered the zero tariff access, but some economists warned that the 15% EU tariff could raise prices for American consumers. In Washington, the reaction was jubilant. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called it a triumph of American negotiation. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick predicted a boom in U.S. manufacturing. On X, supporters hailed Trump's deal-making. At Janasvia, breaking, President Trump lands EU trade deal, entire European Union will now be open to U.S. companies at zero tariffs, one post read. Another, from at Lucasva 91298, called it a huge win for America. But not everyone was celebrating. Lori Wallach, director of the Rethink Trade Initiative, questioned the deal's substance. "Is this really a trade agreement?" she asked in a Washington Post interview. "It's a framework, not a contract. The devil's in the details." Economists like Douglas Irwin of Dartmouth College were surprised by the EU's concessions, noting, "I thought they'd push back harder." Others, like Karsten Brzezinski of ING, warned of inflation and slower growth if the tariffs disrupted supply chains. Across the Atlantic, European leaders walked a tightrope. French President Emmanuel Macron called for de-escalation, while Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni urged goodwill to avoid a trade war. The EU's countermeasures, including $24.54 billion in retaliatory tariffs, were delayed until August, a sign of cautious optimism. But Bernd Lange, head of the European Parliament's Trade Committee, called Trump's tactics a slap in the face, hinting at potential pushback. For Trump, the deal was a personal victory, a testament to his self-styled image as the ultimate dealmaker. As he boarded Air Force One to return to Washington, he turned to an aide and grinned. "They said I couldn't do it. They said the EU's too tough, too stubborn. But we got it done. And it's only the beginning." Back in Turnberry, von der Leyen met with her team, her expression pensive. The deal had averted disaster, but at a cost. European businesses would face higher prices, and the political fallout in member states could be fierce. Yet she knew the alternative, a 30% tariff and a fractured alliance, was worse. "We've bought time," she told an aide. "Now we make it work." As the sun set over the Scottish coast, the world digested the news. Markets rallied, with the euro rising 0.2% against the dollar. American farmers, energy workers, and manufacturers saw a brighter future. European consumers braced for higher prices on wine, cheese, and cars. And in the halls of power, from Brussels to Washington, the real work began, turning a handshake into a lasting agreement. The story of the US-EU trade deal was one of brinkmanship, compromise, and ambition. It was a tale of two leaders, Trump, the brash negotiator, and von der Leyen, the steady diplomat, navigating a high-stakes game with the world's largest economies at stake. Whether the deal would reshape global trade or falter in the details remained to be seen. But for one golden moment in Turnberry, it was, as Trump declared, the biggest deal ever made.